Good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the fifth webinar in a series organized by the Economic Society of Singapore, or ESS for short. I'm Zach, the Honorary Assistant Secretary of ESS and your host for today. Our topic for the day will be on income inequality, unpacking the challenge. Before we start the session proper, and while we wait for more participants to join us, I would like to give a short introduction of the ESS. So we are a non-profit organization established in 1956. Our aim is to bring members from academia, the government, and the industry to discuss current economic issues relating to Singapore and the region. The Society publishes the Singapore Economic Review, which is one of the oldest economic journals in the Asia-Pacific region, and conducts independent research and also hold conferences, networking sessions, and events such as this. Our next event for members is the annual post-budget forum in February, where we invite experts to provide insights on the budget that is announced the week before. So if you're interested in such events and our society, I would like to invite you to join us by following the link in the slide. You can use the QR code in this and the next slide as well. Here are some housekeeping rules before we start. You can post your questions via the Q&A function in your Zoom app. We would encourage you to output or comment on the questions that you feel are most relevant to the discussion. If your question is addressed to any of the speakers, please mention it in your question. Today's session will be recorded and a copy of it will be made available on the ESS website. So on to the topic at hand. In 2019, Singapore's income inequality fell to its lowest level for 2 decades. However, some observers expect income inequality to widen again from 2020 onwards due to the uneven economic fallout of the COVID pandemic. It seems that high-wage work has continued robustly throughout the pandemic, while in contrast, low-wage work has been profoundly curtailed by public health restrictions and an economic downturn. So in this ESS webinar, chaired by Professor Danny Kwah, Dean of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and also an ESS Council member, Professor Kwah and our panelists will discuss the challenges of income inequality in Singapore due to the pandemic and more broadly over time. I will now hand you over to Professor Danny Kwah. Danny, please.
Thank you, Zach. And welcome everyone to this webinar of the Economic Society of Singapore. The topic is, of course, as Zach has reminded us, income inequality. And we're here with this distinguished panel to try and unpack the challenge of income inequality. Now, the challenge in Singapore is particularly pronounced because, together with COVID-19, great power geopolitical competition, global climate change, all of these things affect the open economy that is Singapore's. Together with the disruptive impact of wealth and income inequality, these four, if you like, horsemen of the apocalypse, all of them together, rank right up there among the great social challenges of our time. Observers often like to say that any of these three other problems compound the effects of every single one of them. It is bad enough that that Singapore is beset by any one of these challenges. To get all four of them at the same time, well, that smacks of evil, vindictive karma somewhere in the world. Arguably, however, it is appropriate to zero in on inequality because among all of these four challenges, inequality takes central position in many of our thinking, in many people's dissatisfaction with the circumstances that they see around us. Everywhere in the world, there is visible and growing distance between the top 1% of the income distribution and everyone else in society. Digital technology, new media, new forms of communication all accelerate and widen the understanding, the information, the dissemination of this comparison between the very, very rich and all the rest of us. And all of these developments provide ever greater room for social disaffection. All of these developments raise the need for action on income inequality. But if demand for policy action on inequality has risen in this time, so too has supply. What do I mean by that? The political mood of the modern age means that inequality more and more easily finds its way into the national conversation. Everywhere in the world, there's a combination of democratic forces and populist forces that increasingly empower and entitle people. People sense that their governments now are more responsive than ever to calls to fix inequality. Saying that one will fix inequality is in some sense an easy win, an easy political win. It drives home the ongoing message that so often divides us, that there is an us and a them. And the them on the other side of inequality is who we can, with relative impunity, target. In every nation in the world, talking about policies on inequality, everyday people feel an agency and a power in ways that they don't when they try to come to terms with the global pandemic or US-China tensions. People don't feel that they can by themselves affect the spread of COVID-19 or change the US State Department's attitude towards China. But everybody feels they can likely move the needle on a politician's views regarding more vigorously prosecuting tax evasion, more with greater vigor punishing big tech companies operating procedures, with greater vigor in many nations talk more about minimum wages. So you find that in April 2014, Pope Francis tweeted, "Inequality is the root of all social evil." Barack Obama, at the time President of the United States, referred to inequality as the defining challenge of our time, pronouncing that inequality and the lack of upward mobility were jeopardizing the basic bargain for middle-class America. But just as in every market where there's demand and supply, bubbles can appear. Like many other things determined by the forces of demand and supply, this social rush to condemn inequality might be carried to excess. Let me give you one example. Long ago, an illustrious philosopher, writing in an age where deprivation and famine characterized a lot of ordinary people's lives, stood up and said, "What is disturbing is not scarcity. Instead, it is inequality." Now, what he meant by this is debated by scholars still. My view is that phrasing showed a lack of clarity in prioritizing where urgent problems actually sit. Was this philosopher, like some academics perhaps, so out of touch with reality, where people around him were dying from starvation, for him to say it wasn't scarcity that worried him? Today, thousands of years after that thinker wrote what he did, all of us in every society, we are driven forward still by modern imperatives of right and wrong, of demand and supply for thinking on the problem of inequality. Everyone will agree we need to improve the situation of the weak and vulnerable in our society, raise the low paid, improve the lot of hardworking laborers, look after the cleaners and the rubbish collectors among us. But improving the lot of the weak and vulnerable is different from lowering inequality, unless you believe the world is just a zero-sum game. So that brings us to today's discussion. What should be the right priorities now in Singapore in our thinking about inequality. And we are blessed this afternoon to have some of the clearest thinkers and the most capable practitioners in the area of income inequality to help us think through and indeed unpack the challenge that inequality poses for all of us today in Singapore. Questions like, what most drives the inequality we see in Singapore today? Questions like, what is happening to inequality of opportunity today? And how does that relate to inequality of outcomes? How effective have mechanisms been to provide a level playing field? What are the barriers to progress still that need to be managed? Questions like, what is happening to upwards mobility that allows the poor to continue to improve their situation? Are we going to be like that ancient philosopher, confusing upwards mobility, improving the lot of the weak and vulnerable with inequality? Or instead, was that philosopher right, that social mobility is structurally intertwined with inequality? I'm now going to turn to our panelists. I won't take up your time and hours reading out again and repeating their very, very impressive, very extensive bios. Webinar participants will already have received those in email. The rules going forwards are each panelist will speak for 10 minutes. After going through all the panelists, we will have intermingled a conversation among the panelists and myself, together with questions that I'm going to take from the audience. I encourage everyone, as the discussion, as the presentations proceed, I encourage everyone to submit questions in this Zoom interface. Those questions I will pick up and I will in turn inject them into our discussions. Now, the time now is 5:15. The webinar will end at 6:30 when I hand back to Mr. Zach Lee. But turning to the audience, I'm gonna, again, I won't repeat everybody's bios, but I would like now to invite Professor Lim Sun Sun, Professor of Communications and Technology, Head of Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences at the Singapore University of Technology and Design, to tell us her views on these very important problems that we've laid out. Professor Lim, over to you, please.
Thank you, Professor Kwa. Danny, so lovely to see you, and so nice to be here today in such esteemed company. I am very grateful to the ESS for inviting me to share my thoughts on this very important topic. Zach, if I could be permitted to share my screen. I can, right?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. All right, so let me start my slideshow. So every now and then Zoom tells me my internet connection is unstable. So I hope I'm not going to be on the wrong side of the digital divide today. And I'm not going to torture all of you with my Tina Turner impersonation. But indeed, the question that I'm going to answer today is income inequality, what's digital skills got to do with it? So just to give you a better sense of the views that I'm sharing today and where they are, where they come from, I'll just give you a brief introduction to the work that I do. So I'm actually a professor of communication and technology. I'm very interested in how people engage with technology, in how people incorporate technology into their day-to-day routines. So my work found its roots in technology domestication in the home, where I look at how families struggle with new technologies, how they adapt, how these new technologies actually can enliven family conversations, can enhance relationships, and so on. And obviously with workplaces digitalizing, with digital disruptions encroaching into virtually every industry and sector, it was a very logical extension for me to take my technology domestication approach into the workplace. So currently I'm also conducting an SSRC grant-funded research on digital disruptions in Singapore, principally in manufacturing and finance, looking at how workers in different companies are adapting to some of the changes in terms of digitalization, in terms of automation automation, roboticization, and so on. And of course, you know, in the course of looking at how people engage with technologies, the challenges that people face, the skills that people have or lack when they are engaging with technology becomes a very important part of the conversation. And that's where a lot of my work has delved into issues of digital literacy. And when people lack those literacies, they are essentially excluded. So the conversation around digital inclusion then becomes even more pressing. So my most recent publication was Transcendent Parenting, Raising Children in the Digital Age. Ostensibly, it seems like a parenting guide, but it's not. I was really fascinated by how, with the growth in smartphones, with the growth in mobile communication, the way parents were meant to parent their children, the way parents were communicating with their children's teachers, the way parents were communicating with their children and children with other children was becoming quite different from what we were used to. And this led to what I call transcendent parenting, where essentially parents are always having to transcend the distance between themselves and their children, and they're always having to transcend timeless time and parents all of the time because of the connectivity that has been introduced. So let me just quickly give you a few screenshots taken in the course of my fieldwork, where you can see, you know, there are screenshots of Class Dojo, which is an app that teachers are using to keep in touch with parents, to tell parents how their kids are performing in the classroom. We are also seeing, you know, teachers using WhatsApp to take screenshots of children's homework and then asking the parents to look into the children's behavioral issues and so on. And the reason I wanted to share this, talking about income inequality, is that you immediately realize that parenting today requires quite a great deal of digital literacy. And parents who don't have the intellectual wherewithal, who don't have the time, who don't have the bandwidth to be able to manage all of this, will find that their parenting burden is so much more intense. And parents who are less educated will also find that it is harder for them to play a more constructive role in their children's education. So I wanted to open with this to really warm everyone up to the fact that income inequality can have ramifications in so many ways and can also be manifested in so many ways that seem not to ostensibly link to income inequality. So, of course, you know, what was interesting was after my book was published in 2020, COVID-19 was to explode. And I was asked by various agencies to conduct online webinars where I would provide guidance and support to parents and help them to engage with issues around how they were going to manage work from home as well as home-based learning. And I was hearing a lot of questions from parents who were really struggling with home-based learning because on the one hand, you know, it was so stressful because you're having to do your work and you're having to manage your children's home-based learning at the same time. Of course, there was a constraint on family resources. There was a constraint on devices. There was a constraint on space. And what was interesting was that parents who were much more affluent, much more educated, were frustrated with home-based learning because they thought some of the stuff that was being taught online was too basic. And they wanted the teachers to sort of, you know, elevate things a little bit. Meanwhile, less educated parents were saying that they themselves didn't know how to work with things like Google Docs. They didn't know how to work with Google Classroom. They didn't even know how to register their children for certain online learning platforms. And so the whole business of home-based learning combined with work from home was to really see some interesting fissures around the social inequalities that are already pre-existent in Singapore. Now, moving on, during the circuit breaker, Singapore was to wake up one morning on a Sunday to this front page story on the Sunday Times Live, for which I was interviewed. And the story was really about how families of different profiles were coping with home-based learning. And there was a lot of online chatter because people were stunned by the stark contrast between the two households who were featured on the front page, with one household on the left being a family in a one-bedroom apartment where you can see that the children are essentially working with makeshift furniture, and the elder sibling is having to coach the younger sibling, and they don't necessarily have the luxury of space with which to, you know, be able to learn conducively across the board. Then on the right, you had a family where the father was a dentist. I think the mother had her own business. And, this was a sort of very hunky-dory image of a family where both parents were very hands-on. Both parents clearly knew their way around the internet. It seemed like every child had access to a device if they needed. And so there were no constraints in this regard. So COVID-19 really has been very helpful in that sense in highlighting for us some of the issues around inequalities in digital access. And that's where I then want to rewind a little bit to 2017, when, the gig economy was really sort of exploding in Singapore. And together with an esteemed economist, Dr. Irene Ng from the National University of Singapore, we decided that we had to draw attention to the fact that the gig economy was not going to benefit everyone equally. And we made an argument in this op-ed that we wrote in the Straits Times that essentially those who are higher income will find gig economy jobs to give them more autonomy, to give them more flexibility, to allow them greater opportunities to promote their skills, to broaden their business ventures, and so on. But of course, we then came up with this term, the chore economy, which unfortunately didn't take off because, even though we think it's such a brilliant term, but we felt that, people who were essentially delivering food, people who were driving taxis and so on are fundamentally performing chores that other more affluent people clearly can afford to pay other people to do. And we felt that these workers who are in low-wage gig economy jobs are going to be heavily disadvantaged in the long run, because clearly they are in jobs where they don't have the benefits of upskilling, and they may find themselves trapped in this situation of always having to take on these low-wage jobs. And so this was something that we were very concerned about, and we felt the need to draw attention to the issue. So moving on then, in 2018, I published my research that I had conducted on rental flat families, low-income families who lived in rental flats in Singapore. And this was qualitative research. So I forgot to mention that I'm a media ethnographer. My work involves going to people's homes, workplaces, talking to people, observing their lifestyles, and so on. And what I discovered from my interviews and visits to these rental apartments was that ostensibly, these families were digitally connected. They had smartphones, very often, even nicer models than I had. But when I delved more deeply into what they were using their phones for, it was quite clear that their use of smartphones was very app-centric, in the sense that, they would bounce in and out of the app, and they basically saw the internet as just being different apps. They didn't really have a full conceptualization of the internet being the World Wide Web with a humongous repository of information and different kinds of channels by which they could upskill themselves, educate themselves, and so on. And so what I also found was that their use of their smartphones was very entertainment-centric, very social-centric, communicating, connecting with their loved ones, and so on, which of course is important. But what was lacking was their use of apps to, for example, profile their skills, to, for example, educate themselves on different new competencies, and so on. And this was something that I thought would be appropriately termed invisible illiteracies. And I called it invisible illiteracies because clearly, when you go by standard indices of measuring people's internet literacy skills, you are, saying, well, do these people use the internet? Yes, they do. But then when you delve into what they're using the internet for, the quality of use is not as high. So in the case of this invisible illiteracies, we felt that we had to draw attention to this issue because invisible illiteracies clearly means that people who are lacking skills to take greater advantage of the internet are not being adequately supported, because the standard indices of measuring internet use capture them as internet users. So this was an issue that we needed to address. Then, of course, fast forward to this year when we saw the whole issue of inequalities in digital access, Irene and I would reunite for a new project, which is to get policymakers, to get practitioners, to get different agencies to really look at digital access as something to be seen as more of a utility rather than a luxury. Because when we see how home-based learning is so vital across the board, when we see how with Skills Future programs migrating online, low-income workers who want to upskill themselves having to take online classes, we see that access to devices, access to the internet, and of course, access to skills, competencies, training should really be regarded as a public utility rather than a luxury. So let me just give an example. In the case of, for example, a low-wage worker whom we studied in the course of trying to address this issue, we discovered that she was able to take her Skills Future course because she had been loaned a laptop for her child to do home-based learning. But once the circuit breaker ended and her child had to return the laptop to the MOE, she found herself without a device to continue with her Skills Future training. And this clearly disadvantaged her. And this was an issue that we felt has to be addressed because device ownership in terms of owning the right devices is still not quite appropriate at this point. We see, for example, low-income families not having enough devices for each of their children. We also see, for example, low-income adults who should be having devices to access online learning, not being able to access devices. And also Wi-Fi is not given, particularly in rental apartments, for example, where there are no, routers and so on. And with the home-based learning period, I think, there was the loaning out of these mobile data devices and so on, but they were essentially stopgap measures. So together with other colleagues in NUS and SUTD, as well as the Internet Society of Singapore, we actually worked with ground agencies, civil society agencies. We talked to organizations like Engineering Good. We talked to different agencies that were working on the ground to work with marginalized communities to get them digital access, to really understand what the pain points were, what the ground realities were in terms of digital access or the lack thereof. And we have put together a document called From Digital Exclusion to Universal Digital Access in Singapore. And this document will be shared on the NUS website shortly, the social science agency website, which Irene heads. And we have also shared it with the IMDA because we feel that we have interesting recommendations in terms of how to make universal digital access a reality. And we have therefore shared the document with the IMDA with a spirit towards helping to create new policy initiatives that will help to bring digital access to those in our community who lack it. So that leaves me to the end of my 10 minutes. And this is my website. If you should like to read those op-eds that I mentioned or other publications, you can find them there. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sun Sun. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. So much detail and color and big ideas on engaging with the feedback loop between income inequality, the digital divide, and your ideas for how we might solve many of these grand challenges with universal digital access. Thank you very much, Sun Sun. There are questions that we're going to come back and engage with you on this. For now, however, can I turn next to Dr. William Wan, General Secretary of the Singapore Kindness Movement and a Justice of the Peace. Dr. Wan, over to you, please.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. I'm honored to be among distinguished academics and economists and ethnographers and all. I'm going to speak just as a person who's been observing what's happening to the poor among us. And I have a proposal to make to see how we can help them to make it less unequal for them to compete with the rest of us. So inequality exists on many different levels. They come in different sizes and different shapes. There's inequality, of course, of outcome, and there's inequality of opportunity. Inequality of outcome is, to me, a function of many factors. We are all differently gifted, for example. The talent we have will result in different earning capabilities, and unequal outcomes in terms of income is almost inevitable. However, I know of many who choose, for example, to earn less because they look beyond material success to other more transcendental sense of personal fulfillment. The fact that they can exercise a choice implies that they are given opportunities to choose their outcomes. Unfortunately, opportunities to choose is not given to everyone. And this results in the inequality of outcomes because of inequality of opportunities. This is particularly salient, as Sun Sun professor has pointed out, in the lives of children and poorer families, from the bottom 20% of our society. The kids of these families, and I consider them our kids because they are Singaporeans like us, and we should own them, that these kids are disadvantaged from birth. They start the journey of life on a very unlevel playing field. And unless we help them to level up, they will have a very slim chance of winning in the game of life. I'm cognizant of what the government is doing in the many hands approach to help families and kids during the early years of their lives. There are indeed many, many great efforts exerted through the combination of government, corporate, and community initiatives to help these kids and families. I'm involved in some of them myself. The Commission of Charities report of 2019 discloses that there are 2,281 charities. For a small country, that's a lot of charities. And the great majority of these help families in need. So early last year, Minister Desmond Lee outlined plans to, I quote, better support families bogged down by complex and often interlocking challenges, such as addiction, divorce, incarceration, and illness, close quote. Recognizing that many who apply to the social services for help with complex problems are often asked to submit multiple documents or repeat ad nauseum their circumstances to the social workers, the minister proposed a single touch point for each applicant. He was rolling out a social service delivery program that will ensure that help is given in a more, I quote, comprehensive, convenient, and coordinated manner, close quote. Well, that is all well and good, but in my view, it is still fragmented and it's still not going deep enough. I would like to add two more C's to the three C's of comprehensive, convenient, and coordinated. I am proposing a consolidated and concerted effort, a one-stop shop approach to create a conducive environment for the children of these families so that they are given an equal opportunity to enjoy a more equitable educational outcome. This consolidated and concerted effort is about foresight. Foresight is about knowing where the kids would be heading towards on an unlevel playing field and seeking to prevent it from happening. It is also about focus. Focus is putting all the resources we are already investing in them, in their families, in a more targeted manner. I believe that this consolidated and concerted effort, if curated correctly, will give these kids an equal chance or a better chance at succeeding. The unequal situation is created, of course, by our phenomenal economic success in moving from the third world to the first in such a short time. As the income gap gets wider, and Sun Sun's already warning us that it's going to get wider, the ability to catch up for those who are left behind becomes more and more remote. Hence, they will always be playing catch up and they will never ever catch up. Hence, we need to intervene in a more radical manner because time is not on our side. In my proposal, The key is educational success. But why is that? Because it is still a fact, isn't it? That social and economic upward mobility for the great majority in our society, there are exceptions of course, is still a function of being better educated. Being in the very narrow system of meritocracy, where the entry point is still about getting good grades, getting into good schools, earning a scholarship if you can, and landing a good paying job. How do we do that? When some kids are born in an environment where their parents are struggling to live from hand to mouth. How do we help level up when their kids are disadvantaged, digital divide and all, disadvantaged by a home environment that is not conducive to studying? How can we help them to overcome a lack of resources and stimulation in the particularly important early years of their lives? And I mean from babyhood. As Senior Minister Tharman noted, I quote, "The science and evidences are clear. The first few years matter greatly in shaping a child's potential in life," close quote. There is urgency in taking immediate action. We have already lost too many generations of children who are not able to overcome the disadvantages and have fallen by the wayside. May I respectfully submit that we can level up the playing field if we as a nation, collectively, and making some sacrifice ourselves as people with some means, have that political will to invest in the lives of our children. These are our children for the first 12 years of their life. This is how we can do it. First, do not just give the mothers of these children from needy families a baby bonus. That's good, but we can do a lot more. Start training the mothers to be stay-at-home mothers. How about that? Train them to take good care of their babies, ensuring that they have as much care and stimulation. Give them extra help in learning to understand digital gadgets as all the other babies from the other higher income homes. Give them childcare allowance so that they don't have to go out and work and leave the babies to nobody. And then they can, have this peace to at least focus on giving the best care to their babies to start with. Second, upgrade their one-room flat. The parents need their privacy. The kids need more conducive environment to grow up in, more space to play and study. 3 kids, for example, and 2 parents in one-room flat. How is that? How is that helpful? Third, when they reach preschool age, enroll them in preschool like the other kids. In this regard, I'm making a radical suggestion: nationalize all preschools and kindergartens so that all kids, rich and poor, benefit from the same system. Do away with expensive private systems which give these kids greater advantages at this very early age. It cannot be right that some kids with such advantages start their primary 1 journey reading Harry Potter, while some others are still struggling with their ABCs. That is not equal opportunity at all. The educational development of our children, where rich kids and the poor kids are being developed separately, depending on the ability of their parents to pay, is akin to apartheid development. On social capital, Senior Minister Tharman also said, I quote, "We must also do more to develop the basic capability of mutual respect from young age and a comfort with social diversity. It does not come automatically, nor can we impart much of it through classroom teaching. It comes mainly through social mixing as we grow, starting from preschool and all the way through life. Our system of preschools have been market-based and seen less social mixing than our primary schools," close quote. While the government, to be fair to them, is trying to achieve a greater diversity through our Ministry of Education kindergartens and anchor operators, I say it is not nearly enough. Let there be only one system of preschool and kindergarten. Let all the children from all families benefit from the same educational system to start with. Let the social mixing begin at the first opportunity for all kids to interact at preschools and kindergartens, the rich and the poor. This is possible if, instead of allowing preschools to be market-driven so that resources are tied to the fees parents are prepared to pay, the government should put in the best resources to create the best preschool system to benefit all our children with regard to class differentiation, without any regard to social class. Fourth, with preschool playing field level up, I believe that these children will have an equal chance to succeed in primary school. During this phase, the wealthy will be able to provide expensive tutors to coach their kids. Ideally, I have my way, to be on the level playing field, no kid should be tutored. All kids should be just the same. But that is not going to happen. If we can't beat them, so let's join them, as they say. Let's have a good standard, high standard tutorial centers for all these less privileged kids, so that they will not be deprived of tutorial help when needed. In a tuition-based system, and that's what we are, let's not try to pretend it is not. To succeed, the underprivileged needs more tuition, not less. If we do this right, our children will have equal opportunity to compete at the PSLE level. They will have an equal chance to do well enough to be admitted to a secondary school of their choice. And beyond that, of course, it is up to them. I believe that they will certainly be in a better position to succeed in secondary school than if such intervention did not take place. So let me quote Senior Minister one more time in closing. He said, I quote, I say that tackling the early gaps in children's lives is most important of our strategies to secure a more cohesive society. Early lives matter, close quote. Well, since early lives matter, let's level the playing field to give them, these early lives, the first 12 years, a better chance at succeeding and help them break out of their cycle of poverty. That's my proposal. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, William, for a very vivid presentation, for your, really razor-sharp focus on inequality of on the stark inequality of opportunity you identify out there, for seeking through proper treatment of our children, equalizing opportunities available to them, leveling the playing field, and then providing actually 4 very concrete suggestions, some of which are obviously very radical, but are going to be very interesting to discuss. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, William. Can I turn next to Dr. Swee Ek Leong, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the University of Melbourne and visiting scholar at Nanyang Technological University. Ek, please, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Danny. And thanks, of course, to the Economic Society for organizing this webinar, which I'm very privileged and very happy to talk on a topic that is very close to my heart. Let me first begin by sharing my slides. Just give me a second here. Okay, I hope you can all see my slides over here. It's going to be short, I hope. I'll try to stick to my 10, maybe slightly over 10 minutes. I'm not going to propose bold ideas like William did, unfortunately, and of course not going to perhaps provide the kind of insights that Sun Sun managed to provide. But what I would try to do is maybe do 2 parts. The first part is try to summarize a bit of what we kind of know already, and the second bit would be to try to sort of think about what are the questions and possible answers to address income inequality. So let me begin by sort of mapping out the experience of Singapore for the past 20 years. So some of these you may already know, but some you may not. The 21st century has been a period of very strong growth for Singapore in terms of income. From 2000 to 2019, our median monthly income would have more than doubled. So on a per person basis, it would be something in the order of about $1,200 to almost $3,000. Of course, the question that is relevant, I think, for this webinar is to what extent is this growth, or was this growth, inclusive? So in that same 20-year period, the top to bottom ratio, which is sort of a comparison of how much somebody at the 90th percentile of income compared to someone at the 10th percentile, that number would have grew from about 7.75 times to 8.94 times. Now, these are very large numbers. Also, some of you will be familiar with this creature, the Gini coefficient. That Gini would have rose from about 0.442 to 0.452. Okay. Now, at face value, the rise in income inequality is actually quite small compared with the rise in income. So if you do the math, you will see that the rise in income inequality is about 0.1% per year in that 20-year period, versus the 4.4% per year growth in income itself. Now, however, I want to raise 3 things here. So that's the face value kind of comparison. But there are 3 things here that I think are quite important. So the first point is, in fact, for nearly half the time in that 20-year period, our Gini coefficient was above the level of 0.470, which is sort of going into some dangerous territory. And it, in fact, peaked at about 0.482 in the year 2007. And so I know that Zach actually sort of summarized some of these at the beginning of the webinar. So only in the last few years have we managed to kind of move this number down in terms of income inequality. So actually, for the past 20 years, it has been quite high. Secondly, for comparison, if you look at the latest OECD numbers, the average Gini coefficient amongst the OECD countries in 2018 was a fair bit lower at about 0.407. And I want to point out some of the countries that really strike out. For example, this is the Asian countries in the OECD set, like Korea or Japan, would have Gini coefficients that are far below even this 0.407. So clearly we are kind of quite ahead in terms of income inequalities in a bad way. And finally, the third point here, which is sometimes lost in the numbers, because people may not be so familiar with the Gini, or they don't know how to sort of interpret the Gini. So if you dissect the Gini coefficient, you would see that income inequality is actually more noticeable in absolute terms. And this is sort of a scenario that I'm trying to point out here. But if you randomly pick 2 individuals in the year 2000, at the beginning of the sort of millennium, the 2 individuals will have a sort of average monthly income difference of about $1,500. So if you go to the streets in 2000, year 2000, and you pick 2 individuals, their income difference will be about $1,500. But by 2019, 20 years later, this gap would have increased to $3,700. So my point here is that the man on the ground, the feeling about inequality is much stronger, because you can really feel that income inequality is rising in that 20-year period. So the final point here, I think, on the slide is that income increments at the bottom clearly did not keep up with those at the top. Now, very quickly, I want to fast forward to 2020, and so the bad news we all already know. Singapore economy contracted by about 5.8%, and unemployment is going to hit, projected to hit about 3.7%, which is far above what we're used to for the last 10, 20 years. The question again for us is, are the adverse impacts going to be equally distributed? And I'm afraid the answer is no. And I want to put together 3 pieces of evidence that we have about this so far, about how the pandemic is hitting income inequality. The first one is a report from Ministry of Manpower in the 3rd quarter last year, and they found that the non-PMET jobs, the professionals, managers, etc., so those people who are not in those professions, those jobs are more susceptible to retrenchment. Second piece of evidence is from a DBS report, so quite an interesting one. So DBS did a sort of anonymized data mine of their retail clients, and they found that the low income earners are overrepresented among those who experience a decline in the salary. And amongst these low-income earners who had a decrease in salary, about half of them saw the incomes decline by more than 50%. So this is quite stunning, right? So this is saying that the low-income are worse hit, and they're hit very hard. And the third piece of evidence here, which is not specific to Singapore, but it's coming off from a Brookings Institute report, more about sort of predicting what's going to come. They're thinking that the low-wage jobs are not only going to be more susceptible to retrenchments, but also least likely to come back. And this is due to a lot of factors, which is a lot of research sort of talking about this right now. Things about telepresence, about automation, and some things about the digital divide, for example, that Sun Sun already talked about. There's some structural things that are going on, which people predict are going to be quite permanent, and that is going to be in some sense exacerbated by the fact that we have a pandemic. So I think the conclusion here is that the pandemic will continue to widen the income gap. So let me very quickly kind of summarize those two things. So if you put the past and the present together, the only thing that seems very constant is the rising income inequality. So in the good times, we had rising income inequality, and now that we're in the bad times in a few years ahead, it would also again seem that income inequality is going to continue. And I know that this is going to be a big question, but I will pose it anyway. So why should we care about rising income inequality? And this is by no means going to be an exhaustive list, but I want to put some points here that I think are important. The first one about why we should care is, and I think a lot of people agree, we prefer more fairness in society, not less. And so income fairness is probably one aspect of it. And so to that extent, we should be caring about this issue. But secondly, income dispersion may be symptomatic of inequality in other dimensions. And I know that William also talked about this before. So it could be about inequality in opportunity or just social inequality. And we can define that creature more later on. But there's a sense that income inequality itself is just a symptom and not perhaps the cause of the problems that we care about. Number three, which is again kind of related here, income inequality could have some functional properties that worry us. For example, they may undermine aspirations, they may create resentment, conflict, perhaps even of the kind that we see like Wall Street Occupy movement, etc. So there are things that we care about, that we worry about, that may be driven by income inequality, and we worry that once it gets to a particular level, that they would kind of break through the roof. And the final reason that I think is important here is that amongst all these, or amidst all these discussions or concerns about income inequality, there is a hidden creature about poverty, that low-income households may become at risk of material deprivation when we see rising income inequality. And I'll talk about this a bit more later on. Now, the policy responses, I think there are many. There's thanks to research and thanks to the experiences from other countries and other contexts, we know that there's a lot of potential interventions that we can look to. But I want to sort of classify them into two parts here. The first part is, if we think about income inequality as a symptom, then perhaps the treatment is to go for the cause, not the symptom. So if you think about income inequality as a symptom, then you want to tackle the issues about, say, inequality of opportunity. So things like gender equity laws, parental leave, social spending on health, education, etc. Those are the things that could, in fact, help address rising income inequality. But if you think of income inequality itself as a cause, then you sort of go in but directly tackle income inequality, so even the income spread there. So then you would think about redistributive taxes, transfers, social assistance schemes, perhaps even ideas, I know these are some of the ones that have been talked about even in Parliament recently, universal basic income, or even a minimum wage. And these are not radical ideas, they've been around for a long time, but I'm just trying to group them into two parts here. Now, admittedly, the government has covered a lot of ground And I think these are not strange creatures to us, because we know that a lot of these in some form have been already put in place in Singapore. So I did a very quick sort of scan of what is available out there, and this is pre-pandemic. These are the means-tested social assistance schemes, and this is just a snapshot. There are more of them. And you can see that, now, of course, I don't want to run through the whole list. I don't have time, but I want to point out two things that are quite interesting. One is you can see this is a multi-ministry operation. It's very complicated. It's not obviously coordinated in any way, because though they're means tested, in Singapore we don't have a poverty line, so the eligibility criteria are in some sense all over the place, and that is maybe something that we need to work on. But that's not the point of my talk here, of course. But this is I think it's remarkable, perhaps, to think about it. It's remarkable that even though we don't have a poverty line or some kind of a standard to measure who deserves what, that there are so many of these social assistance schemes that are being put out there by the government. And this is pre-pandemic. Now, specific to the pandemic, we have temporary policies that are being put in place, and these ones you'll be very familiar. And in fact, you could go to a website, gov.sg, and you can immediately download many of these. And a lot of them are targeted at the households at individual level to sort of help tide over income losses that are temporary, but also the businesses, the ones that are targeting the businesses, like the job support scheme, that will indirectly, of course, also help with income losses and job losses, etc. Now, there are going to be, and let me end by in 2 slides here. The 2 key questions in my mind, and there are 2 things that I think are going to be important. There's a short run question and a long run question. The short run one is, have these policies help cushion the pandemic pain, especially for the low income? And the long run question is, given the pandemic led structural changes that we expect that will come or have already been come in some form, will the existing policies be enough? Will they be enough, for example, in closing the income gap? Will they be enough in preventing or reducing poverty? And that's kind of the second long run question. Now, these are going to be challenging questions to answer, and basically there are 2 reasons for why that is. The number one is we don't have an official poverty line, and therefore we don't even have a national database of vulnerable households. We don't know who they are, how to find them. So it's going to be difficult to gauge the impact of the pandemic, or indeed it's going to be difficult to gauge the impact of any policy that we introduce. It's hard to wrap your head around this until you have the data, or to identify the households that are vulnerable. Moreover, because poverty is itself multidimensional, so I think more research is required to look at the outcomes, and these are the things that Sun Sun and William have been talking about, some of them, looking at nutrition or health and education of children, home ownership, broadband access. Some of these things are not usually thought of as sort of indicators of whether you're poor or not, but in Singapore, I think we would think of these things as being sort of quite basic. We want to have a sense of how these things are, whether these things are being achieved by sort of lower income households. So in closing, I think what I want to say here is, so we're currently working on a project about measuring poverty in Singapore, which is obviously fundamentally tied to the topic of inequality. So we think that working out these measurement issues will help facilitate policy targeting, and of course also help with program evaluation. So there's so many schemes here, so we want to see how successful each one of them is, for example. So that's all I have, and I thank you for listening in.
Thanks very much, Ek. Excellent presentation. I mean, you gave all of us concrete facts about income inequality. You told us how the pandemic was changing the dynamics of that, and you opened up the question about, what reasons we should care, why we should care about this. Put that another way, is income inequality a sufficient statistic for the concerns of society? Is it alone by itself what we should be caring about? And towards the end, when you talked about the targeted government schemes and how poverty was multidimensional, the lack of a national poverty line, obviously we need to be thinking about those things at the same time that we think about how income inequality is actually not such a good measure for all of these larger concerns, for the same reason that you say poverty is multidimensional, it's not measured by just income, whereas inequality is measured by just income. So you're trying to tell us that while we are concerned about these statistics, we also want to move beyond. And also the way you connect it with what Sun Sun and William have presented, your description of what government schemes are already in place, including schemes targeted at kindergartens. And be very interesting to merge that with some of the questions that are coming in later on when we have our conversation with what William and Sun Sun have presented from their perspective. So very nice coming together of very many different sets of issues. Before we turn to that conversation, so last but not least, I would like to turn to Professor Ho Kong Weng, Associate Professor of Economics at Singapore Management University, to tell us his views, very, very pointed views on inequality, social mobility, and a range of other important considerations. So over to you, Kong Weng, please.
Thanks, Danny, and also thanks to ESS for inviting me to this discussion, a webinar discussion. I was asked to give 3 points, and therefore I will talk about 3 points. First, I want to say that inequality and social mobility are actually related, and they should be considered jointly, especially in policy recommendation. Just now, from Dr. Leong, we heard about the various facts related to Gini coefficient of Singapore and so on. In fact, the Gini coefficient for Singapore decreased for the past decade, but not necessarily the case for much earlier years. And if we look at in detail by decile of a various decile of family, the average growth rate of the monthly income by household income decile was actually sort of tilted. The low income household, the growth of their income has been much lower than that of the higher decile household income groups. In the past, in the before 2010, okay, the decade before that, but more recently, the so-called S-curve has tilted. That is also consistent with the declining Gini coefficient in Singapore for the past decade. If you look at transition matrices, being that what is the probability or chances of children born in the bottom quintile that they are able to move up to the top quintile. Our finding, or according to the report from MOF, we are doing quite well actually compared to several advanced countries. Therefore, the question is whether our inequality, market inequality, is optimal from the social viewpoint. Is it optimal? Do we want to have lower inequality after redistribution, noting that tax burden could be much higher? Hence, it is not just looking at the overall outcome of inequality, but also the social preference. So that's what I want to say, which is important. And thinking about inequality and upward mobility together, we need to have a model. I have a simple conception model published in Ho 2010, and more recently is in a forthcoming chapter, Challenges to Social Mobility in Singapore. So in that framework, the demand for upward mobility is based on parental optimization. In other words, when there's inequality, actually it is related to the returns to education investment by parents. So therefore, there are some good things about inequality, not necessarily bad. However, we are asking for what is the equilibrium and whether it's socially optimal or not. Policy-wise, if we just focus on inequality and forget about the incentive to move up or the upward mobility, then we may recommend wrong policy. So that's important to take note of. Okay, so this is what I want to say. So we can discuss further, maybe in the Q&A later on, whether policy about minimum wage or progressive wage model, or even policy with regard to migrant workers will help to lower the inequality, or whether it will help in terms of social mobility. So now I go on to my second point. We have to realize that the growth process in Singapore have been skewed biased in the past and perhaps in the future too. If you look at the pandemic, the impact on the unskilled workers may be more severe than on the skilled workers. So therefore, we need to know more about the growth process and what are the barriers faced at the lower end, and also not forgetting the middle group as well, because the aspiration of the middle income group are very important. Singapore is small and open. It is like a follower in a world of ideas. So the growth is based on what assimilation of advanced ideas from advanced economies such as the G5, the group of five. So based on some of my research with other co-authors, the transmission of all this advanced idea is actually skewed bias and leading to rising inequality. Therefore, it may have certain sort of like trade-off, right? We want to have growth, but the growth could be not inclusive, and government intervention is needed, and also to help the unskilled or those who are less privileged, more disadvantaged, how to acquire skill and to move up accordingly. Yeah, Singapore population is rather small, but we may want to have a larger population. But how to do it? That would be like through skilled bias population expansion. So that would have some impact on inequality as well as upward mobility. Then we just now, I think Dr. Wan also mentioned something about the education system in Singapore. May I say that one phenomena is marketization of the education sector or liberalization that benefit the skilled much more than the unskilled to a certain aspect. So that may lead to rising inequality. The tuition industry, should we need to have the tuition industry, or should we have the national education through the primary school and the secondary school covering sufficient material so that the children do not need tuition? So we want to ponder about that. And how about program of Skill Future? Are they effective? Have we done any cost-benefit analysis over there? Are they helping the skilled workers much more than the unskilled worker or otherwise? One good policy is the revamp of the preschool education sector through ACTA, so that will give some parents, especially those from low-income family, certain sufficient resources so that the children can have a good starting point before they go to the primary school. So we note that the low-income family and the children face more barriers in technology adoption. Sun Sun mentioned that earlier, and investment in upward mobility. They lack in monetary resources or time investment. They might have limited technology know-how, and they live from hand to mouth, and even barriers in childcare, elder care, limiting their time or opportunity in upgrading or upskilling. So that is quite evident given what we observed in the COVID season. Yeah, politically, there may have a potential middle income stagnation, as in some countries. So that must be avoided. So that is important. Aspirations are very important, especially for the youth. So I want to stress that. That is related to my third point, is about subjective well-being, not just individual, but also social well-being. Social well-being depends much on upward mobility, opportunity, and it is more than individual well-being. Individual well-being is also not measured just by economic achievement alone. It is also other factors. Other factors are also important. If you look at some research conducted with respect to survey data for US and Europe, although inequality could be higher in US compared to Europe, but the impact on their subjective well-being, happiness, or life satisfaction is not that great based on some past study. Why? Interestingly, they perceive high upward mobility. The perception of upward mobility is very important in the subjective well-being reported by the respondent. So perceived upward mobility and actual upward mobility may be different. So we have to take note of that. Individual well-being may have economic and non-economic factors. It could be aspiration related to the family, aspiration related to altruism, aspiration related to career. Career-oriented life aspiration actually have a negative impact on subjective well-being. So I will term that as a zero-sum kind of life goals. So therefore, non-zero-sum life goals will be more important, like family-oriented life goals, as well as altruism-oriented life goals. So I want to also ask whether meritocracy is working in Singapore. Meritocracy is also related to equality of opportunity. That is also closely related to the notion of inequality. But the perception about meritocracy may have changed. The understanding of that may have changed too. So in conclusion, I would want to say that a more caring society, starting from the family, would be more important. Yeah, that's all I want to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kong Wing. Wonderful, wonderful presentation. And I like very much the way you connected inequality with all these other things that ought to be important for society, for social well-being, as you say. One thing, we don't have a great deal of time. I want to try and combine a lot of the questions that I'm seeing with, what seems to me common ground in all four of your presentations. So maybe I can, what I'd like to do to begin is to get you all to get a bit of reaction from you all to the following statement. Income inequality is not a very good indicator of social well-being, the kind of social well-being that is meaningful in society. For every one of you, I would argue. X presentation towards the end talked about how we needed a poverty line. But if that poverty line is based on just income, well, we kind of have income inequality, which we can use to reflect on that. So what he means is poverty is actually multidimensional. So what he wants is something richer than just income inequality, than just Gini coefficients, than just comparing two randomly selected people. For him, income inequality is not really the issue. In fact, as I turn to William's presentation, Kong Weng's presentation, Sun Sun's presentation, all of you talk about how there's a much richer social problem at work here. And it's not just income inequality. Income inequality is not a sufficient statistic for the real social concerns that all of you have. Can I get you to reflect on that whether you think our national focus, our national and international obsession with income inequality has actually hidden from us the real challenge. Perhaps I can begin with William first, and then after that, I'm going to go Sun Sun, Kong Wing, and then coming back to Egg. William.
Thank you, Danny. I did say at the very beginning that because we are differently talented. If you're just focusing on income, I mean, some of us are so talented we could just make money just like that, So it's not all about just the differentiation in income. I think for me, the greatest concern is that we want to give everyone born in Singapore, our own children, broadly speaking, equal opportunity, so that they have a chance to make the best of their life and to reach their own potential. The way things are, many are left behind. That's the point. And how do we bring them up so that they can get a chance to compete with the rest of us?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Sun Sun, your presentation, of course, I want you to address this as well, but connecting it to your presentation about the digital divide, opportunities, universal digital access. You are going well beyond just sort of crude measures of income inequality, because your research, you believe that it is those opening up those doorways that are going to be much more important for taking our society forwards. Can I get your reaction to this line of thinking?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. And you're totally right. I love that you use the term doorways, because indeed, for me, I think it's not about income inequalities, it's about skills inequalities. And I like that Kong Wing talked about the whole issue of skill biased technological change, because we are suddenly in an era where technological change is very much going to privilege those who have the skills, and those who are without will find themselves far behind, which is why the push for universal digital access, whether it is to first devices, second to the internet connections, and third to the skills, is so vital, because each one links to the other. And once you don't have one of these components, you're just going to be forever catching up. And in a society where, you know, we're crazy rich Asians, where everyone seems to have a device of their own, why is it that we can't do more to equalize access to the internet, access to skills? And that's where I think the inequality in skills, or what some academics call the second level digital divide, is something that really needs a lot of urgent attention.
Thank you, Sun Sun. Thank you very much. Kong Wing, I want to turn to you now, and then at the end, I'm coming back to Ek. But Kong Wing, your presentation on this particular point is so nuanced, because you go and talk about social mobility, you talk about skills bias, you talk about envy and altruism and social well-being. But for you, it's like you've gone well beyond thinking about just income inequality. It's the whole combination of things that matter to you.
Okay, so I start as like a model, economic model. What are we concerned with? Okay, so I suppose you are concerned with the national well-being or social well-being. So what are the components of national well-being and how it is formed? It could be due to bargaining, or is it due to voting, or is it due to a democratic process? Okay, so that there are various interest group or different groups of people perhaps trying to have a greater weights and so on, or the leader would have the wisdom to decide what weights are supposed to be given there. Okay, so start with this overall yardstick. So I think as a result, what we should care for is not just income inequality, it's actually any problem of social inequality. Certain group are disadvantaged, social aspect, and also we have to deal with the family, intergenerational linkages, especially the children. Dr. Wan is concerned about the children, right? So I think that is important, because that's the linkage, and there's an intergeneration transmission of either human capital, attitudes, value system, and so on. Whether they face a particular like minority group, face any discrimination. So that's about the social cohesion, inclusiveness, or inequality. Yeah. Therefore, I want to pick up something that SM Taman may have said. It is taken from the Bible, actually. Am I my brother's keeper? So what we need is altruism, caring for other groups, you see. So despite the fact you have income inequality in the society, as long as there is altruism, either from the individual or intervention from the government, having some incentive to do that, right? Or community and so on, then we would be okay. We would have a high level or growing level of national well-being. So somebody might have said, what we need is not equity. What we should need, according to some justice theory, justice in responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Kong Wing. So thank you so much for putting things this way. If I can try a slight twist, and then I'm going to turn to Ek for his thoughts, a slight twist on what you said. If we focus too much on income inequality, which we're all agreeing we shouldn't now, it makes the world zero sum. It's like it's making it look like I will benefit only if those are the top 1% have something taken away from them. And it makes the world zero sum. And I love the way that you've said, okay, well, we should be looking well beyond that, drawing on observations made by other political participants. If we move towards a more altruistic society and we care about those around us, the world is not zero sum. The world is positive sum. We lift ourselves by helping those around us. And that's a wonderful forward vision that just takes away from a sort of a zero-sum us versus them kind of view of the world. So thank you very much for injecting that idea into our conversation. Ek, come back to you, and I hope that I haven't been unfair, because what I did was I used your presentation to launch our conversation about why actually income inequality is not really what is keeping us awake, even though it seems to enter a lot of conversation. You began by giving us statistics on income inequality, but your ending of your presentation was actually about this rich view of how we need to go out and measure those who are weak and vulnerable, measure poverty in a multidimensional way. So even though you began by telling us about income inequality, actually your concerns are not about income inequality now. They're about helping the weak and vulnerable, getting the right measurements so that policy can be in place to help the weak and vulnerable. Is this the right way to think about how your presentation has helped launch this very interesting conversation between all of us?
Well, I wouldn't take credit for that, but I think you're quite spot on with how you managed to kind of draw all of our kind of conclusions and talk together. But I would say this in response to what you asked. So I agree with you. Inequality, whether it's in income or other outcomes, or even inequality of opportunity, is definitely not a sufficient statistic for what I think of as social welfare, perhaps. Yes, inequality is one aspect of what we care about, but it is not everything. And I think importantly, it is something that stirs strong emotions, and it can be dangerously sometimes exploited for political reasons. And during bad times, which is where we're in right now for a few more years, it may actually inhibit solidarity, which is going to be important for us to kind of write this out. So instead, really, what you said is what I want to kind of end with. We should put more focus on other things that we care about. So like poverty or deprivations that can be measured multidimensionally. And all the speakers here have talked about those dimensions that I completely connect with, and I really hope sincerely that research and policy discussions can move in that direction, and that this webinar perhaps can help launch us in that direction and make more people get involved in this endeavor. So
exactly so. Well said. Well said. Thank you very much. I want to have a last round, if we can, if the organizers will let me, on policy. And in particular, I want to ask some questions that might make some of us feel a bit uncomfortable. The issue of what COVID has done, what the pandemic has done in terms of income inequality is a very multifaceted one in itself. As many of you have pointed out, that its impact within a society has been very severe on the weak, the poor, and vulnerable. Those who have had to, those whose jobs are so much at risk. The peculiar thing is, when you look across countries, COVID has been much more a problem in rich countries than it has been in poor countries. And so there's a very peculiar overturning of these effects. The United States is the world's richest economy. It only has 4% of the world's population, however, although it accounts for 25% of the world's COVID cases and 20% of the world's COVID deaths. So rich countries have actually taken a huge hit in terms of what's happening in COVID, whereas many of the other countries in the world, not as rich, have been able to, they've all suffered, but they've suffered far less. So this brings me to my last round, as it were. I don't know if they'll let me have this time. Zach might come in and say, no more. But if we can, let's make ourselves be a bit uncomfortable about policy. In particular, Sun Sun and Williams' policy proposals are actually quite dramatic. Universal digital access, nationalization of preschools and kindergarten. And whereas, in contrast, some of the evidence that we've presented elsewhere from Prof. Ho, from Ek, show that there actually are already government policies in place that target kindergarteners, that target preschoolers. They're not to the extent of nationalization, but there is targeted policy already. And some of the questions that have come in are asking just how heavy-handed do we want policy to be? Do we want a lighter touch policy in terms of lifting the weak and vulnerable? or do we want to go whole hog in terms of nationalization of some of these institutions? Because some of the questions that are coming in point out that the choices that other Singaporeans are making, other Singaporeans might not be altogether comfortable with a nationalization of the preschool system. They feel that if they can't get something that's better for their kids, that they will go elsewhere, that we will lose talent in Singapore. So let me end with this. I throw it open to all of you, but I want William and Sun Sun to respond first, because there's a bit of pushback in the audience that says, both of you being a little bit too heavy-handed in your proposals, given that ACT has already shown us we actually have a lot of such actions already in place. So William, can I ask you to begin?
Actually, it was intended to create that kind of reaction.
Good, I'm glad we're getting that.
We are all too comfortable already,
Yeah,
so it's good to provoke each other a little bit
Indeed,
more.
absolutely.
Obviously, it's quite radical. But when you think about primary school is nationalized, secondary school is nationalized. Why not preschool and kindergarten? I mean, especially if we are going to give the other kids, if you like. I hate to use the word our other kids, an equal opportunity. So the principle for me is, again, I think somebody said something about biblical. Okay, there's a biblical quote here. Do to others as you want others to do to you. So, I want my kids to succeed. All my kids have succeeded. My grandkids have succeeded. I'm very proud of them. But I should want to see all the other kids succeed. Shouldn't that be my goal too? Then how can I do it? Sometimes we get to do it the very hard way by sacrificing some of our privileges in others, that others may rise up so that they get an equal chance.
Thank you very much, William. Sun Sun, universal digital access. How will that sit with those who are having to pay for it, taxpayers, etc.?
Right. So I really loved the slide that Ik shared, where he had the different social assistance schemes and all of the different ministries.
Yes.
On and the different salaries ceilings, right? And that actually very much also captures the issue with digital access, because there were many schemes already in place, like the new PC Plus and so on, but these schemes were difficult to negotiate. The form filling was also difficult for needy families to access. Very often, the ground workers, the ground social workers told us that essentially schools don't promote the fact that they have these schemes.
Really?
And the form is in the principal's office, and the student has to know to go to the principal's office to ask for the form. So that's exactly where our proposal, we went to look at all of these finer details to see how the pre-existing schemes can be improved, can be enhanced, so that people who are already struggling with bandwidth issues in their lives can have the burden of having to seek this kind of assistance kind of relieved from them, and to have these things offered as a matter of course once the family is identified as being in need. And so we recommended in the proposal that we should incorporate laptops into schools' book lists so that parents recognize the importance for laptops. We talked about how digital subsidies should be woven into MOE and Comcare's financial assistance schemes. We also talked about how low-income adults should be offered laptops for loan if they sign up for SkillsFuture type programs. And so as it is, there is a lot of work done. We have to give credit where credit is due. But then how do we further streamline it? How do we improve the provisions so that people don't have to do extra work in order to find ways to help themselves? And I think with the policy side of things, there's always issues of how much should we give to people, right? And one of the issues that Irene and I always struggle with is that people will say, oh, people who are poor, if you give them free internet, they're just going to use it for gaming and for porn and whatever. And it never occurred to you that rich people also game and have use porn. But somehow when you want to give free digital access to the poor, all these issues will come up. But we need to go beyond these kinds of conversations and think about how enabling and how uplifting digital access can be.
Thank you very much. I mean, I want to come back to your own research, Sun Sun, where you showed that, certain groups in society, given what they already do have with their phones, actually are not using the digital access that they already have in the most valuable way possible. And so having universal digital access, that's not the, as economists say, that's not the binding constraint. That's not what's going to get us all to move forwards in this.
That's
So,
right.
but your point about how, well, we need to just make things easier for everyone, and your point about the forms being hidden away somewhere else, those are spot on. So thank you very much for that. I'm getting a signal that, you know, I'm running way out of time. So can I propose this? Can I get a final statement? I've given William and Sun Sun the space to talk about the things that they are passionate about. Can I get Ek and Kong Weng to give a final short statement, and then I'm just going to close this session. Ek, please.
Sure. I actually don't think I have too much to add, and I don't really want to hijack the ideas of other people, but I really felt that this was a very nice webinar, especially coming from some of those radical or not ideas from maybe William or Sun Sun. I think that I feel like if inequality is a concern and there are related issues, say on poverty, that people do care about, it's great that we have platforms like this that we can launch discussions about ideas and ultimately maybe even test them on the ground and see what the public feels, and hopefully refine those ideas and get them into policy at some stage in the future. So I really see this as kind of the way that we can help to sort of contribute and move forward with these discussions.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Ek. Kong Weng.
Yeah, can I seize the opportunity to answer some question?
Very quickly.
Over there, I think the very last question in the Q&A mentioned about inequality is the way is due to the way we measure the importance of occupation. Why professors get paid much more? They cannot clean the roads better, right? So that is the limitation of the market. So the market linked to this productivity measure in certain way. So I would think that the way to do it is to make sure that jobs are actually dignified, okay? And then we have to maybe define what is meant by success, not just economic. And we need to have altruism, you see.
Exactly.
So this is one. Then Nathan, I think, asked about the perceived, in the way I phrase it, it would be perceived inequality and actual inequality may be different. So if it's a gap, if there is a gap, the government should provide information and educate the people how to understand this inequality. Perhaps a survey can be done, why people perceive inequality is much higher and what are their concerns. So what is the circle of the information that they think that inequality is much higher, okay? So that the detailed investigation can be done now.
Great. Thanks very much, Kong Weng.
So that's the answer.
I'm going to stop you from taking any more questions directly.
Okay. So
because I'm all for equality of opportunity. And if we start answering specific questions, we will never finish them unless we do all of them. I would prefer not to do that.
That's one final statement.
I've tried hard to weave the concerns that I've seen here in all the questions into the general flow of our conversation.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to call that to a halt. I'm sorry.
Okay. Just one final remark, just closing remark. So since they are all different, right? Heterogeneous.
Yes.
And we know that the outcome of opportunity will be different. So it is our responsibility to take care of others. So that's what I want to say.
Thank you. Well said. Thank you very much. Listen, this has been a most exciting, wonderful conversation. I expected no less from the four of you. I knew that you would deliver on this. There are so many issues that we've left untouched, so many interesting things that I and so many in the audience want to come back on. So I've said I've tried to weave a lot of the concerns into our general conversation, but not identified specific questions. We will have to maybe do that some other time. And if the Economic Society of Singapore will allow me, maybe we will do another session on income inequality, given how much interest we've been able to excite in this. I want to thank the panelists for being such good sport. I've poked fun at some of you. I've sort of tried to incite response from some of you, but you've all been such good sports. I want to thank our audience for continuing to stay on long after the sessions ended, and for the great interest that they have expressed in all of their comments. I want to turn back now to Zach, but again, thank you all panel, thank you all audience very much. Back to you, Zach.
Right, thank you, Danny. Looks like we'll be organizing another one of these sessions again very soon. I would like to ask the chairperson and the speakers to stay behind while we ask the rest of the participants to leave the room. I would like to thank everyone again for attending our ESS webinar. And if you would like to know more about the society, once again, you can go to our website, and we'll be posting the videos for this event very soon on the website as well. So please go to our website and have a look at it. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.